Okay, I think it's about time to start. Welcome everybody to today's lunch webinar titled The Role of Place Management in Crime Prevention. And my name is Jonatan. I'm here with the Safe Places Network, who is hosting this lunch webinar series. And this is actually the third one, which then, like I said, deals with the role of place management in crime prevention. And if you don't know what Safe Places Network is, it's a network that tries to combine both education, research, and practice to deal with the topics of safety, security, and especially the role of the place and environment of these issues. And if you know me from before, if you've seen this webinar series before, I'm usually the host and moderator, but today I will actually take part and share the findings of this project together with my research team here, with the Urban and Community Safety Research Group. So yeah, once again, my name is Jonatan.
Hello, I'm Ioannis Ioannidis.
And I'm Gabriel Gliori.
And I'm Vania Ceccato.
And we have other members that are not here today, called Professor Per Näsman and Professor John Eck. We're very grateful for their participation in this project. But we also would like to take the opportunity to thank our funding organization, Länsförsäkringens forskningsstiftelse, as well as the numerous very important partners in this project, meaning the both public and private housing companies who made this project even possible. So we're very grateful for them. But yes, so I guess to just start us off, Vania, could you perhaps tell us, like, why should we care about place management and safety? What motivates our study?
Yes, the relationship between crime and the characteristics of neighborhoods, they are well studied for a long time. If you think back, maybe nearly 100 years, if you start thinking about the Chicago School and of sociology, and so there has been a lot of work done on crime in neighborhoods. But what we observe is actually that most crimes, they tended to be concentrated in a lower level when you think about space. So we are not talking about neighborhoods, but sometimes you can talk about streets, schools, apartments, buildings. And the international literature shows that if you take, for instance, apartment complexes, you see that many apartments, they don't have, they don't have any crime, or very few, but you end up with a few apartments concentrating a lot of crime. And this is actually what you see in one of these graphs that you are seeing on our background there from University Hill. This evidence is already in the 90s. You see something similar for apartments, for bars, and other kinds of facilities. This type of evidence, it was basically inexistent in the Nordic or Swedish context. So we were quite happy in trying to develop this study to also look for Stockholm. Often you would think that what make, let's say, an apartment or a building having disproportionately more crime than the other, buildings is possibly the environment, the location, whether if it is the city center or in the periphery, the people that are living there, We also understood that housing ownership was very important. So one of the things that we actually tried to figure out was that whether that crime would be concentrated, by housing ownership. And this is what we needed to figure out before actually we would do the analysis of what people do in those places, which we think that has, would affect, and which is basically the role of the place managers. So before we we started doing the analysis of the management of the place, we looked in Stockholm whether crime would be concentrated by building. And as you see in this graph, it does. We also see that in this map that this concentration is major. Actually, if you have a body of a building there, just one part can concentrate the majority of the crime happening in that particular building. So the question is why? And we think, and that's what the literature says, is that it has to do with what place managers, in Swedish, platsförvaltning, doing in that particular place, which could be, for instance, the maintenance of the building, the way that, the area is surveyed, the kinds of behavior that are allowed in those areas. But what we did first was actually to see if the concentration exists in Stockholm. And this disproportionately concentration was there for Stockholm. But another thing we also noticed is that this concentration, vary by type of crime, right, Ioannis?
Yes, exactly. So as we can see here, and as Vania said from the previous graph, total crime concentrates in a small amount of building. That intensity changes when we study different offenses. So if we split that by here we see narcotic-related crimes, violent crimes, theft, residential burglaries. So we already see when we split it by public and private ownership also how this relationship changes, but it motivates us. Just before that, I want to explain a bit. So what we see in this graph is that on the vertical axis, it's the building percentage. On the horizontal, is the building percentage, and on the vertical is the crime percentage. So we see that, for example, in public buildings, 21% of buildings concentrate 80% of narcotic-related incidents, while in private, that's 12%. So 12% of buildings, so a much, much more intense concentration. So, but then about the ownership, how does the ownership structure this relationship? So if we go to this slide, we see public and private averaged by offenses per 100 apartments, and we see that total crime again, public-owned housing has much higher concentration. But interesting is that vandalism, for example, has almost double the relationship. Narcotics and violent crimes, similar. So public housing, even when we control for the number of apartments, has a very significant concentration. So with this, through these insights, we move to this brings us to the aim of our study. And the purpose here was to investigate the importance of place management for safety and security of residential areas. And we wanted to understand what is the role of place managers and how that affects the safety and security of the residential areas. Our unit of analysis moved to the building level, so we study the microplace. But before we move on further, Jonatan, could you tell us a bit more about what place management is actually?
Yes. So broadly, you can say that place management is a set of practices or maybe perhaps an ongoing process of shaping, maintaining, and governing a specific location or environment, and specifically to shape how it's or influence how it's used and experienced to promote safety, security, and vitality. And like Ioannis said, we look at the building level here, or the micro level even, but we understand that crime and safety is affected or influenced at multiple different levels. Even if you have the manager and the different practices that they do, the work that they do surrounding the residential buildings, they have to be considered in the context of the buildings, the social and the physical conditions, and as well as the overall city context, the size of the city, the socioeconomic, demographic conditions as well. And even if you want to, even more larger regional conditions as well. I guess in the context of environmental criminology, there has been a very useful framework developed by mainly John Eck and Tamara Herold, called the ORCA framework, which is formed by these letters, starting with O, standing for Organization of the Environment, Organization of the Physical Space, which is about designing and also maintaining the physical environment to deter crime, or also just improve safety in terms of increasing natural surveillance and so on. But there's also more about the behavioral factors, such as regulating the conduct of, for instance, residents at the place. So this is setting up clear rules and establishing norms in the area, and then also perhaps more technological in a sense, or more physical, is access control, where you usually have gates and fences, but also more locks and alarms perhaps, to control who can access a building or a residential area. And also then the last one, the A, is more acquisition or allocation of resources, which is perhaps influencing all of these other letters, which is about how the managers acquire resources and distribute their resources, which can be financial, but also about having resourceful people in place to do the maintenance as well. So this is what place management is, but based on this, looking at just official statistics and crime data is perhaps not enough. So Gabriel, perhaps you can tell us what we actually did.
Yes, I can walk you through a bit how we worked in this project. We did use official statistics such as crime data and land use data, social demographics, socioeconomics. But this was mainly used to select and define our study areas with inspiration from the UK, where we created a deprivation index, and to make sure that we compared relevant contexts. But the core of our studies relies on surveys and interviews. So we conducted 2 surveys, one national survey to place managers, which focused on their work practices, responsibilities, and routines, and one survey to residents in specific neighborhoods, where we asked about both safety perception and victimization, but also the place management satisfaction and local problems and recommendations. And this was to understand how place management relates to safety. And we also conducted interviews with place managers to dig deeper into this. So here are some nice pictures from us putting the surveys in envelopes and delivering them to the buildings, which was a lot of hard work, but it paid off. And so we used all this data that we created, which we created a unique data set. And we did statistical analysis and ran regression models. So we can move on a bit to our study area. The study is set in Sweden, which is a good case, because even though it's characterized by low inequality and a strong welfare state, there are some differences between areas. So to capture these differences, we selected 2 main types of municipalities. One large municipality, Stockholm, representing a metropolitan area, and one smaller municipality, Växjö, representing a non-metropolitan area. You can move to the next slide. Within these two municipalities, we selected 8 areas, 6 in Stockholm and 2 in Växjö, specific neighborhoods that we wanted to study. And we made sure to have both tenure forms represented in each of these neighborhoods to make sure also that we compared these within the same context. So we had both public housing and condominiums included in all neighborhoods. So with this in mind, so most of what we know about place management actually comes from the US, the UK and Australia. But what does it actually look like in Sweden? Is there any difference from how we work here?
Yes, I mean, one of the questions that we first had is what place managers do, because of course we knew by the description of other studies in the US that they had a number of activities, and we knew that some of these, what we would call place managers, are not a homogeneous group. And this also we was expecting for Sweden. So what we did was to do a small survey in which we requested place managers, people that would be working in municipalities at the level of buildings, but other levels like with crime prevention, but still connected to the place management work. And then we asked, what do you do? How do you describe your work or your daily work, and the activities directed to safety? Sometimes we didn't even prompt the question about safety and let them tell the activities they did. So the graph that you see in our our background is actually the answers that we got from this small survey. And one interesting actually result is that very few of these place managers associate what they do with issues of crime and safety. So less than 25% of their daily work is actually what, according to them, devoted to issues of crime and safety. But this is what they think. When we analyze their answers, we see actually that there are a number of activities that are related to implementing place management in place that has an effect on security and safety. So most managers spend more time on security and safety than they realize. And this is something of an interesting result. Another two interesting points that we needed to highlight is that most of their work is devoted to what we call the organization of space, which is basically the management of the work both indoors and outdoors in relation to maintenance. It can be, changing a lamp, make sure that the door is working as it should. It could be outdoor activities to maintenance of bushes and things like that. These people are on call all the time, and obviously much of this work is devoted to that part. We use the ORCA model that Jonatan just presented to split their activities as you see there. Another point that is interesting to talk about is that, as we expected, the group that do these kinds of place management work, it's not an homogeneous one. We see, for instance, more managerial work being done at a more local level, at the local building level. You have technicians that are not associated to a particular building, but move around within the housing companies because they are specialized and they have a function in making the work, the quality of those buildings, to stay in shape. But you also have what we call super controllers, which are the ones that control the place managers. They can be in the housing companies, but they can be also in the municipalities, because place managers often they are engaged in crime prevention initiatives of all sorts. So there is this kind of also super controllers that also have some sort of place management function. So these are the kinds of answers, or that place managers gave to us when they answered the survey, showing, and these quotes show clearly the importance of what they do and how safety is an important component. For instance, one says safety, yes. Almost everything in our operations can be linked to safety in some way. If the lights are intact, it increases safety. Removing graffiti quickly increases safety. If we have our own staff, which allows tenants to recognize them or even build a relationship with them, that increases safety. So as you see, there is a clear connection between what they do and ensuring that people are safe in place. Another quote, safety issues must always be considered in every aspect of management, including investments, operations, and maintenance. So as you see, there is quite a lot of work that is done that is related to crime prevention, although it's not acknowledged. It's not part of what they are employed for. And this is kind of an interesting point. Another thing that we see in Sweden that we don't see elsewhere is that in Sweden we see a lot of investment, or at least some investment in collective activities, in residents' well-being that, in the US people talk very little about. And to some extent has a lot to do also with, how people experience place managing place. This can be, funded by the housing companies, or sometimes they couple up with other partners to attract these kinds of activities. It can be parties like the pictures that shows there, but it can be common gardening that actually increase, the social cohesion at very local level. Normally, social cohesion is associated to, neighborhood level characteristics, but we see taking shape at the very local level. So anyway, what we see is that there is a definitely evidence, and this is coming also from our models, that there are clear mechanisms linking place management activities, practices, and how much crime and how much perceived safety is experienced at the local level in our study areas. So place management matters, at least for so far in our analysis that we have done it. So the question is, how does these results look like for our study areas?
Yeah, I can talk about that a bit. So what we saw from our results is there is, if we can call it a management gap, the experienced management quality is lower in public housing when compared to private housing, and variations exist between the study areas also and the companies. If we can see the next graph, we can make it more visual. So here we see Stockholm and Växjö, the two study areas, and we surveyed there about the quality of place management. And what we see, if we compare condominiums with rentals, we see condominiums having almost, like in some cases, maintenance done on time, for example. It's above 60% for condominiums, while it's lower, 40% almost for rentals. The most significant difference we can see is in the efforts to improve the area, and there we see that it's almost 80%, while efforts for rentals, it's close to 40%. If we see Växjö, there the relationship is much more evident. We see almost a double case in efforts to improve, 80 to 40%. Similarly, maintenance done on time, 80 to 40%. That means that people living in condominiums have a much higher experience on their place management than people on rentals. But I think it's interesting to see from Jonatan, and he will explain us a bit, when we split on areas, how does that change?
Yes. So what we could see that was, even when we take into account the more neighborhood context, that we saw significant differences between the forms of tenure here, the public municipal like rental housing and the private condominiums here. So this is based on the questions that Ioannis just mentioned before. We created this index of place management, or the quality of place management, and as here, the 6 areas there in Stockholm, even though it looks like there is small differences, and this is because this index centers around, I'd say around 2 most cases. That is generally when they have like some positive, some negative experiences of the management. But we see here that there is statistical significance here between almost all areas between the different forms of tenure, except in one neighborhood in this case, which is Södermalm. But in Växjö, we can see this was very much clearly significant differences between the forms tenure in both of these areas. So we can see that at the neighborhood level also we see both variations, but also differences between the different forms. But since we did this at the building level, we could see this. We could also see variations at this this micro level, and this is the map for place management index. You can see this. The top one is the private buildings, and the lower one is the public areas. So you can see even within the same form of tenure, we can see variations between different buildings in the same residential area. And this is the same case for safety in this case, and as well as the self-reported victimization here by a building. So, and I guess the question here is also then, why do we see these different variations? So before we say because of place management, we also saw some using descriptive analysis, we could see that there's some association with perceived disorder, in terms of littering and people arguing in the streets and so on, but also in terms of the level of social cohesion. And in our survey, this was defined by the extent of how they trust their neighbors, or they interact with the neighbors, if they exchange favors and so on. And what we saw there, that higher social cohesion, lower perceived disorder, less crime, and fear of crime in general. But this is only just looking at certain associations. What we did in the next step was to use multi-level logistic regression to analyze this at the building level. So we had both consider both the individual level as well as the building level variables. So, and what we could see already in the beginning was that a lot of the variation in both crime and fear could be attributed to the building level. There's something that differences between buildings that could be attributed to the variation in fear and crime. So I guess, Vania, can you perhaps explain a little bit more what exactly can influence crime and safety at the building level?
Yes, as you well mentioned before, there are variations at the level of the building, and of course, in order to say something about the importance of place management practices, we need to control for a number of other place and even building individual characteristics of the people that answer our questionnaire, and also, housing ownership, which was definitely an important factor. And of course, with modeling, you try to control for all these confounding factors to be able to test or see if the variables of interest came up of significant. So we have actually two sets of models. One was for crime and one for perceived safety. So in one side, we want to explain whether variations in crime were explained by practices, experience of practices of place management, controlling for, as I mentioned before, the types of populations living there, whether there is a high or low cohesion, crimes that happen there, and then, like perceived disturbance, not the crime in itself, but it was the perceived disturbance. And also a number of other factors, including housing ownership. So what we see is that for crime, we see at least three components of the place management model coming up significant. One has to do with, for instance, poor regulation of conduct, as the setting of rules and norms, sometimes reinforced by activities that people do together, or by clear rules that are in the place. Another factor that also came out also significant in terms of place management is the poor allocation of resources, which means that the less allocation to resources in the area also turn out to be associated to more crime, and also poor high control access. In this case, we see that, for instance, more CCTV, for instance, or gates and locks, these kinds of gadgets that are fairly, I would be saying, easy to put in these buildings, are also present in places of where there is more crime. So it is a little bit of an unexpected sign, because probably you would like to have, maybe less high control of access, or a negative sign there. But the interpretation that we can give here is that areas that have problems, place managers are work on it. So they install locks, they will invest in CCTVs and so on. So this is the side that we can say that place management is kicking in and has a part on the explanation of more or less crimes in these places at the level of, for instance, the buildings, take into account the context of those buildings. We also use this for the same kind of model to explain safety. So poor safety in these areas that we studied were related to a number of factors, and all these factors that are there in the screen, they are significant to explain poor safety. And as you see, the component that comes up as significant there from the place management component, the ORCA model, is poor organization of space that has to do with the maintenance. So probably a little bit that, areas that are not well maintained, garbage in the floor, or, people notice that maybe the place is not well maintained. This will kick in and will affect the perception of the safety that the residents themselves define. So there is this relationship clearly and significant in the model. So, people that are working on a daily basis with these problems they are actually very, working in very different conditions. We heard from the interviews with the place managers that some of them are working with places where explosions happen, shootings, really tough types of problems. Other are, minor problems that you might find elsewhere. So the conditions for place managers are very different in our area. So what we are measuring is just the outcome of their work. We also wanted to ask them what actually they do more in detail to understand, the conditions of their work and why certain areas underperform and others outperform. Because as Ioannis showed, there are differences within housing tenure. Why still within the same company some do better? So to try to understand a little bit more, we actually try to investigate the situational conditions of a place manager. Can you tell me a little bit more about these barriers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, we did throughout the interviews we did identify like themes of different types of barriers to the performance. So one of this was perhaps, like Vania said, this contextual factors, such as with the crime and disorder, or like in general the surrounding areas and the context of that also. Like some areas have problems of perhaps that managers is not directly themselves responsible for, in a sense, like when it comes to explosions or gang violence that you've heard maybe happening in Stockholm, but also just being close to a city square or something can also affect compared to another that is a bit more detached from the more central areas. Also, we compared this perhaps not rural and metropolitan, but non-metropolitan and metropolitan context in the terms of the size and the capabilities perhaps of a municipal company in Stockholm compared to Växjö or other cities. As well as what we saw also from some of the interviews was that managers, based on perhaps their own background, had different experiences dealing with the residents in one area compared to another. Could be about discrimination in different forms. There's also more larger, broader, like organizational factors that you can consider here. Especially between public and private, there is differences in the capabilities of investing in large projects, for instance. There's differences in how you have different management models. If you have more team-based management models, or more perhaps an independent manager covers a larger area, and which also creates different like ability to use resources and so on. As well as also like in terms of education between the different, also between in the same manager teams have we also seen, but also overall in the company or between companies as well. So there is we've seen that is perhaps a lack of a somehow unified like level of education or like skills and knowledge in terms of what they need to do and in the daily work. Yes, I think so. What can we actually say about the conclusions of this project, Vania, perhaps?
Yes, maybe you can help me out in concluding here. But the conclusions I would say is so far is that place management practices matter for crime and safety. Of course, we see some mechanisms, as I mentioned, there are components of the ORCA model coming up significant, even after we control for the individual and the building level characteristics characteristics and area level characteristics. So there is definitely practices there that are different, and we probably would need to know a little bit more within the housing companies what are the differences, much more in detail, to single out the difference that we see, for instance, at the individual building. And this is something that is unique in our data set. I don't see anyone that has done this kind of individual building level analysis. So methodologically, we are trying to take a step forward to try to nail the mechanisms between what place managers do and actually the type of safety that people are perceived there, both in terms of a victimization but also safety perception. We do see this relationship with, for instance, place management in relation the regulation of conduct for crime and for perceived safety. I think the most important is this kinds of signs of in the environment that actually makes people feel unsafe. And this is, again, it's connected with probably a deficiency of a place management. The other thing that also we see clearly is that our models are models, right? They are representation of reality, and they do well they work, but we also wonder to what extent the models are capturing all the differences between tenure, because what we see clearly is a very strong effect of housing tenure is still determining quite a lot of what people do in terms of a place management, right? So the question here is, how can place managers be altered or changed to the specific characteristics of each company? Because of course we cannot change the reality. We cannot really change the whole housing stock and say now it's all private, and probably it's not even desirable. In a welfare state country, you should be able to have also the opportunity to rent a house instead of buying. So this is not actually a solution. The solution is try to understand within the housing tenure which are the practices that do well. And some we see in our models that some of actions in terms of allocation of resources and maintenance are kicking in very well. So the question is, how can we change or mimic this in the places that are not doing this well? So altering the practices. And the third conclusion so far is that place managers in Sweden actually do more crime prevention work than they realize, and and acknowledged, because probably when they go for a job as place managers, as place platsförvaltare, they are not thinking too much about security, but nowadays, as many of them say, they actually do quite a lot of that work. But what we also noticed from the interviews you mentioned before, Jonatan, is that they all do not face the same conditions. And, some areas are tougher than others. And what we are doing here, we are assessing just the output. But we know that in some areas it's much tougher than others. So this needs to be included in future work, how actually we incorporate that information. Another thing that we also noticed and came up also in the interviews is the lack of unification of the education of place managers. They don't have a specific, a common training. And we see that there is an understanding of a passing knowledge from older and senior staff to more junior staff, because this is what they say in the interviews. So there is some sort of a knowledge transfer within the housing companies, but this is not standardized. So, which probably we wonder if that would be something would be desirable. Should we standardize it, the education of place managers to be able, to offer all housing companies that kind of quality? I think place managers in Sweden play a key role, and this is based on our results so far. They play a key role in crime prevention, and it is something that is not acknowledged, but overall, and probably there is a reason from us to leave the neighborhood level analysis and go down, because of course this is something that is missing in our analysis. So my suggestion is that we should utilize the ORCA framework as an evaluation tool in crime prevention, because of course we can learn quite a lot on the management practices, which can inform why certain areas are more safer than others. And how we think that this could be done in practice is probably suggest to housing companies to try to implement some kind of a basic and standard education for managers of all types to handle safety and security issues. Sometimes it's a question of, as we say in Swedish, bemötande, right? These connections with, they do on an everyday basis with residents. So my call for everybody that is listening us is that we need to shift our mindset. Place management work is crime preventive, and it is also something that contributes to the safe work. So that's all.
Yeah, and we have a report of our preliminary results of the study in Swedish available, so you can scan the QR code, or you can contact us also if you want a copy. We'd like to iterate. This is some preliminary results. We're still continuing our analysis of the model results and so on, but I think this is already promising, what we've found so far. And I think the final report will be in the August, September, I'd say. So thank you. I think we will start answering or start the Q&A section. And I guess we can say this also. Like the next webinar will actually be on the how street structure shape car and theft and machine learning approach. This will be the 20th of May, I believe. So be sure to tune in then as well. But I think we'll answer some questions that have already come in to the.
So we had a question about if Växjö is representative for a small municipality in Sweden. What we think about that, and I don't know, I can take it. I can't scroll there, but. I would say we think it's a good representation of a small Swedish municipality. It has one public housing company, like many other small municipalities, compared to Stockholm, where we have three or four public housing companies. And of course, it looks different maybe in the northern part of Sweden, where it's more rural, more scarcely populated. But like this Växjö municipality, it has a small core town and a large rural area around it. So we thought it was a good representation for this study as a non-metropolitan area.
Because it cannot be too small,
No.
because otherwise the housing structure doesn't work for a quantitative analysis. So it was a little bit of a balance between choosing one municipality that actually hold. And of course, it depends also of our partners. Växjö was interested to work with us, which we were very grateful for. And this allowed us to work with a small, with the same model, but in another context.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why we are careful to not say rural urban. We're saying non-metropolitan and metropolitan. And in the Swedish context, Stockholm is this giant city compared to a lot of the other cities. Perhaps maybe Gothenburg and Malmö can be somewhat comparable, but comparing Stockholm and like that is a very unique context compared to other cities. So I guess that is also like just comparing those two different. How does this model perform in different, very different contexts? Yeah. Yes, see, there's could you see a correlation between level of social cohesion and form of ownership? And I believe we did see overall, there was some, overall, I think, higher social cohesion with private housing. But I think there was also variation by neighborhood, actually. I believe there was actually one neighborhood where the public housing had actually higher or very similar, at least, level of social cohesion. We also created this, index of social cohesion in that case. So we saw some of it, but it's not just a clear-cut, general rule. Like we have to still take into account the context there.
And when we plotted that, it was a descriptive analysis. So I suggest, I think it was Johan who asked, take a look on the report, and there is a graph showing a scatter plot between, I think, social cohesion and was it crime, right?
Yeah.
Place management.
Place
quality.
management.
Yeah.
So you can see some of this variation, but there is just a bivariate correlation between the two variables. The effect of social cohesion needs to be considered when we put everything in the model, and that came up significant anyway, as I illustrated in one of the slides.
Note that in the survey model, the type of company of the private or rental was not actually significant. So it was other factors that, in that case, that explain more, I guess, than specifically the housing ownership. So that's why I guess we see even more that, yes, just doing bivariate analysis is not enough. Like you have to take into much more. I think there's also just a table just looking at social cohesion between the companies and by area also for both Stockholm and Växjö.
I mean, there's a questions about what stood out in particular as a difference between Stockholm and Växjö. And I guess actually we can connect that to the previous question. That we saw much bigger differences between private and public in Växjö compared to Stockholm, as we also saw in the graphs that was shown in the presentation. Well, both in terms of perceived management quality and as well as social cohesion between the two tenure forms. And this was something that stood out to me, that even though you have housing apartments so close to each other, just the form of tenure makes such a big difference, even though they are in the same neighborhood. Did you react on anything else?
Yes, well, there are even, some of the components of a place management, like organization of space, also embedded differences in the physical environment of these buildings. We didn't consider in the model, for instance, the age of the buildings, and we know that modern buildings, perhaps they would offer qualities that we probably didn't control for. But it can be even the placement of a garage or what we normally call the washing, where the washing machines, what we call here in Sweden tvättstuga, laundry room, placed in certain locations of the building that make people, it's an area of conflict. We have participated in meetings with residents in which the whole conflict was around actually the practices of washing clothes. So it means that the way that the architecture of the building does have an effect apart from housing tenure. We in some of these variations within the building, the architecture, the design, and so on, it's not completely controlled for. And I imagine that it could have an effect between the two areas, but also within here in Stockholm. Yes. It would be good to try to extrapolate this type of methodology for many areas in Sweden, so then we would have a better handle to analyze the case of Växjö in Stockholm. Nicely would be, for instance, to do for Gothenburg as a parallel for Stockholm, and another small one, for instance, for Växjö, to see if there is anything to do with the context, smaller city, big city, which is a little bit unclear when we have only two examples of each case. So it's harder to draw more conclusions than the ones we did so far.
This says you explain a lot about the survey results, but what about the interviews with place managers? I guess we had semi-structured interviews with. First, we did in Stockholm with the specific managers responsible for the areas that we sent out the survey to as well. So we try to, if possible, see if there is something with specific areas that could be linked to how they work or the different challenges perhaps that they are facing. So, and then we followed the ORCA framework when we structured the questions, but then we let them, divert if they needed to from just talk about their experiences and what specifically they do as work, but also their experiences also. I think this is what we're trying to do now also with Växjö. So we're trying to somehow see if there are some things that can be compared and if there are differences. We've already seen that there's perhaps differences in like organizational structure, like in how they have more perhaps independent managers in Växjö compared to the teams in Stockholm, for instance. So
But even how quick they respond to the calls of service. We have seen that there is a number of priorities that they have followed depending on the housing. If there is, for instance, a broken toilet, and if they have in the apartment two toilets, it's not an emergency, but if you have only one, probably you need to send someone really quick. So there is, depending on the types of a problem, you have a number of things there is a degree of a priority. So it's kind of interesting to understand a little bit of the specificities of their work at the very local level. Another thing that we also notice in terms of, we are close to wrap up now, but that I want to mention is that we have seen quite a lot of difference between the place managers experience their own work. Most of them, they seems to us very nice and kind people, but they are tough. They need to deal with, difficult problems. They are called normally to solve difficult situations. So there is but some indication of, problems of working place in which people don't feel, completely safe in their own work because they have to deal with this difficult situation. So the social interactions not always are easy to deal with, and you see, like you mentioned before, these situations in which the work of a place manager is easier than in others, which obviously will also kick in the whether people assess them well or not. Yeah. So I think, do we have...
Maybe we have a short answer for final questions. Johan asks also if we could see a correlation between areas with higher serious crime and the crimes on building level, and if we could see differences in the place managers and how they work in these areas.
I think in the model that we had the we controlled for, like, we had the self-reported victimization as the dependent variable, but then we had the police recorded crime as control, and that was, I believe, it wasn't significant for most types of crime, but it was significant for one model. I do not remember which one exactly now. So it seems that there is perhaps about who reports crime and differences in, like, if you actually report crime to the police and if you report it in the survey, can be differences there. And if you could see difference in the place managers' work in these areas. I mean, we could see that there was differences in the evaluated. And I guess we have to remember that this is how we measure place management in this case is about from the residents' perspective, like how they experience place management. It's not exactly what place managers do there specifically, because if it's not noticeable, if it's not visible, if their work is not visible, then that is missed. Like we can't capture that. So this is only from the residents, and I guess that is something we can do in future research to see if we can somehow capture it more specifically from the manager's perspective in this case, and see how that correlates with crime. But so we did see, like we said, that some ORCA variables that were significant in the model could explain some parts of the crime victimization and also parts of the perceived safety in the areas. So I could say yes to an extent, is my answer.
I have a question about the definitions, the terms. Private and public. So what we can say, private, in this case, we refer to owner-occupied apartments, we call it. So that's bostadsrätt in Swedish, or tenant ownership is also another term. It's not a direct translation to English, but in Swedish, bostadsrätt. So if the person owns the apartment and not rents it.
Condominiums.
And just about one, Moa asked when the final report will be published, but maybe we can mention about the book we're writing.
Yes, but the report is coming in August. So we can you can come return. In September probably it will be available in our website. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess for the private and public, it's a private company doing the management, I guess you could say that, and the public municipal company that's doing the management for the other. So it's rental versus condominiums, like they said. So but yes, I think we're running out of time. I want to thank all of you for joining me in the presentation, and also thank you to the audience for asking questions and also for listening. And we hope to see you for our next webinar, which is the 20th of May, on how street structures shapes car theft using machine learning. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you.